In this section, we're going to take a look at Azure Blob Storage, which provides us with another tool to store data in Azure. Let's start by making ourselves familiar with the basics of Azure Blob. Azure Blob is one of the services that are offered as part of a storage account. There are others such as table, queue, and file shares, but for the moment we're only going to focus on Blob. Azure Blob provides us a way to store unstructured data. This is a similar concept as to how data would be structured on a file share. However, instead of using SMB or CIFS, Blob storage is accessed using HTTP and HTTPS, though it is typically recommended to only allow traffic on HTTPS. It can also be accessed using the REST API, which provides us the ability to work in Azure Blob Storage via PowerShell or Azure CLI. There are a variety of tiers that we can store our data on depending on the frequency in which it's accessed. This gives us the ability to store data that is infrequently accessed at a lower cost tier. Backup data would be a good use case in this example. We also have the ability to have our data stored in more than one region. If one region has a failure, we can still access that data in a second region. This helps provide fault tolerance, however not quite at the scale we saw with Cosmos DB. To get an understanding of how Azure Blob is configured, let's take a look at how we would create our storage blobs. The first thing we need to do is create our storage account. Everything we do from here on will be done within the storage account. Within the storage account, we create containers. The containers can be thought of as folders. Please note, there is no RBAC or any sort of permissions that we can apply to the containers. And then finally, within the containers, we can then create the blobs. These are various objects that you are storing. It could be a text file, virtual disk, video or audio files, backup data, images, etc. It is unstructured data, so you can store just about anything you want in a blob. Now let's talk about some of the storage tiers. Storage tiers are available with only the general purpose V2 storage accounts. The first one we're going to talk about is hot, or the hot storage tier. It is optimized for storing data that is accessed frequently, so any data sets that you're working with typically should be in the hot tier. Cool is used for storing data that's accessed less frequently. Typically consider this tier for data that won't be accessed for at least 30 days, maybe short-term backups or older data sets. Finally, archive. Archive is used or optimized for data that's rarely accessed and won't be accessed for at least 180 days. The delay to retrieve data or rehydrate it from the archive tier can take hours to complete. Only the hot and cool tiers can be configured at the storage account level. The archive tier is available at the blob level as well as the hot and cool tiers. So what this means is if you have data that's in a storage account or specifically within a blob storage, you can either configure the storage tier at the account level for hot and cold, or if you want to on the specific blobs or individual blobs, you can configure it there as well. Data in the cool access tier can tolerate slightly lower availability, but still requires high durability, retrieval latency, and throughput characteristics similar to that of the hot data. For cool data, slightly lower SLA, but still has the same durability as the hot data. As you move between tiers, you are charged for the writes as you move to a lower tier. As you move to a warmer tier, you are then charged for the reads. So as data goes from cold to archive, you are charged to write that data to the archive tier. And then as you rehydrate from the archive tier to the cold tier or the hot tier, you're charged for the reads as part of that operation. Now we're familiar with Azure Blob Storage, let's go into the portal, let's create a couple storage accounts and create some blobs within. Once again, we're in a favorite resource group, and we can see here we actually do already have a few storage accounts. If we look down below, we can see we've got the Skylines Demo storage account, as well as the Skylines Diag 911 storage account. However, we want to create a new one, so let's go up top and let's search for storage account. And you can see here we've got a few listed already. We're going to go ahead and do add. And again, pretty familiar screen at this point, but let's go ahead and look at the options. We're going to set our resource group to Skylines. We're going to call this Skylines STG ACT for Skylines storage account. We're going to leave our location as Central US. We'll leave the performance as standard. We're going to leave the account type as general purpose V2. And then as far as replication goes, we've got a few different things to look at here. We've got locally redundant, which basically means we've got our storage account is defined within one data center within a given region. It's going to be replicated 3 times within that data center, but it's only going to be within one data center. Zone redundant means that we're going to take that data and we're going to replicate it to multiple data centers within a given region. geo-redundant, then we're going to take that a step further, and now we're going to replicate that to 2 different regions. With RA-GRS, or read access geo-redundant, we're going to take our data and we're going to have it read available in the secondary region. In the primary region, or the region that we're defining, it's going to be read and write, but it'll be read only in that secondary region. And then the next 2 options for geo-zone redundant means that, similar to the difference between zone and local, when we do geo-zone redundant storage, is we're going to have the data replicated to multiple data centers within a region. So rather than just having it in one data center in a region and then in a separate region having it in another data center, now we're going to again replicate it between data centers in those regions. And then read access geo-zone redundant storage builds upon that same concept. We can have read access in our secondary region, but we're also going to replicate that data to multiple data centers within both of those regions. For this example, we're just going to go ahead and select zone redundant. And we also now notice we have the blob access tier. Since we're using general purpose v2, we have that option. If we were to change this to version 1, you can see it goes away. We'll go ahead and leave ours on v2, and we're going to accept the default of the hot access tier. If we go to networking now, we can look, we've got our same connectivity methods we're pretty familiar with at this point, to where we can determine what networks can access this resource. If we look at data protection, you can see we have the ability to turn on soft delete for the blobs. Additionally, we can also turn on versioning for blobs, as well as a change feed for blobs. A change feed could be useful for something like, I don't know, Azure Functions maybe. If we go to advanced, now you can see we have some of our more in-depth options. So is secure transfer required? If we mouse over this, we can see essentially, is it HTTP or HTTPS or some of the other protocols that are required. Minimum TLS version, large file shares, some of this other stuff, we're not per se worried about that since we're focusing on Blob at the moment. We'll go ahead and take a look. We're not going to define any tags. We can review and create. Looks like everything passed, so let's go ahead and create this. So while that's running in the backend, I also wanted to look at another way to deploy our storage account. So if we go minimize this, we've got Visual Studio Code set up here, and we've got a Azure CLI example for creating a storage account. If we walk through this, you can see we're using AZ storage account create. If we did a quick Google search for storage account Azure CLI, we'll be able to find the document walking through this. I'll also include a link to it in the example files. But in the meantime, if we take a look here, we've got name, we're doing second storage account. We're putting it in the same resource group. We're setting the location to Central US. We're specifying the kind, storage version 2, which is the general purpose v2. Again, we're using standard ZRS for our SKU. We're requiring that access is done via HTTPS, and we're also setting our access tier the hot. So let's go ahead and copy this command. And let's go back to the Azure portal. And looks like this one's done. But while we're running, let's go ahead and open up Cloud Shell. And let's go ahead and paste this command in and run it. And while that's running, let's scroll up here. We're going to bring this down just a bit. Let's go to resource. And then here we can see we've got our storage account that's up and running. You can see we've got our access tier standard hot. We're using local redundant storage as well as general purpose v2. And if we scroll down on the left, you can see we've got our blob service. And if we open up our containers here, you can see we don't have any in place yet. So let's go ahead and add a container. And we'll just call this container 1. Let's go ahead and create it. And remember, if we thought about containers, essentially this is a folder. But let's go ahead and open that up. You can see sometimes new items might not show up right away. So let's try to refresh the browser. That looks a lot better. You can see we don't have any files in here. So let's go ahead and upload a file. If we go to select file, you can see we've got the city and city2 JSON files from when we looked at Cosmos DB. Let's go ahead and open those files, hit upload, and now you can see we've got a couple files there in our container. If we want, we can click on these and we can change the access tier if we wanted to make it from hot to cold, or we can also right click on here and we can download them, or view the file. So here you can see we can view it just as easily. If we wanted to make a change to it, we have that option. Let's go ahead and discard for now. So now we've discarded those changes. Let's go back to home real quick. Let's go see if our other storage account finished running. So let's go back to storage accounts. And here we can see second storage account. If we open that up, again, you can see this one's using ZRS for zone redundant storage. If we scroll down, containers, we don't have any here yet because we just created it using the Azure CLI command. Let's jump back to the PowerPoints and take a close look as far as how we can manage our storage account.